So I'm not going to talk about that tricky gospel reading that Chuck just gave us today, sorry. If you want to hear my thoughts on it, I have preached on it several times in the past, and you can find it in my sermon archives on my website. Today, rather, I'm going to talk about faith. I'm going to talk about faith for two reasons. First, our reading from the letter to the Hebrews invokes faith several times, and I'd like to explore that with you. And second, over the course of my 4 weeks off, I discerned the need to recommit myself to some spiritual disciplines in order to exercise my faith. At the end of today's sermon, I will invite you to do the same, but first let's define our terms. What is faith? Last week's reading from Hebrews gives us this classic definition. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Now, that's not exactly clear, but I'll take a stab at what this might mean. For the writer of Hebrews, faith is the aspect of our spiritual lives that compels us to look beneath the surface of reality and see God's grace-filled presence undergirding all things. This special perception fuels our hope and helps us walk in faith, assured of God's presence. But this looking beneath the surface of reality takes a lot of practice and dedication. It is so easy to get caught up in the frenzy of our lives and our fears of the future that we fail to perceive the foundational presence of God. So we practice our faith. We practice our faith like a star tennis player practices her serve. Coco Gauff has hit that first serve 1,000,000 times, but she'll practice it 1,000,000 more times. We practice our faith like Yo-Yo Ma practices the Bach cello suites, again and again and again, refining rhythm and bowing and dynamics and intonation, and all the while reveling in the sublime music the master composer created with a bunch of tiny dots and lines 300 years ago. A simpler definition of faith springs from Hebrews' more complicated one and from this embrace of the concept of practice. Faith is practicing the presence of God. Faith is practicing the presence of God. That's the line that's going to be on the test later. So everybody got that? I have somebody who takes notes at the 8 o'clock service, but nobody here does. That's fine. We believe the presence of God to be the foundational principle of creation. God spoke and continues to speak creation into being. The uncountable relationships that make up our universe, from the nuclear force of subatomic particles to the gravitational balance of celestial bodies, from osmotic equilibrium within cells to the interplay between family members. These innumerable relationships all reflect, however imperfectly, the perfect relationship of God with God. We call this the Holy Trinity, but that's a sermon for another day. For today, let's stick with this thought. Our faith teaches us that God's presence is the foundational principle of creation. So, if God's presence is that foundational principle, why don't we notice it all the time? The problem is that we evolved to notice change, not constancy. Our ancestors who noticed the bushes quivering and therefore dodged the saber-toothed tiger, they passed on their genes more often than those who got eaten. And if we have any anthropologists in the room, obviously I don't know what I'm talking about. God's presence is the most constant thing in the universe, the fabric upon which creation is built. So it's really hard to see. But we do see God's presence, And we see this deeper reality more often the more we practice our noticing, the more we practice our faith. We see God's presence in the beautiful geometry of blooming flowers and spiraling mollusk shells. We see God's presence in the endless ocean and an infinite night sky. We see God's presence in the love we receive and in the love we offer. God's presence is there in those things and in everything else. We live out our faith when we practice our noticing of that presence. And we practice our faith by striving to be that presence in the lives of others. I mentioned at the beginning of this sermon that I discerned during my vacation the need to rededicate myself to spiritual practice. Just like exercising my body, I need to exercise my spirit through spiritual disciplines. As we move into the next school year at St. Mark's, I'm recommitting myself to reading the Bible every day, learning from the example of wisdom keepers, writing fiction, and playing my guitar. I wonder what spiritual discipline God might be calling you to take up that will help you live out your faith. Can you get me my water bottle, Bob? Thanks. Ponder that wondering question while I share with you my most recent song, which I wrote this week. I wrote it because I was contemplating living the life of faith. Thanks. Dahlia in bloom, sacred geometry, the tides and the moon, dancing with gravity, a swallow in flight, soaring through atmosphere, a puppy's delight. Whenever you're near, there are burning bushes all around. Everywhere practice the presence of God. We practice the presence of God. The deer in the wild, as long as she lingers, the birth of a child, tiny little fingers, a friend on the phone, calling just to check in, a moment alone, to hear the Spirit beckon. There are burning bushes all around. Everywhere is holy ground. So with our eyes wide open, our hearts awoken, our lives interwoven, and our feet unshod, we practice the presence of God. We practice the presence of God. A gathering in church, holy community, an end to a search, at long last serenity, a mission to claim justice and charity, God calling your name, the grace of new clarity. There are burning bushes all around. Everywhere
treasures of God. Yes, I hardly ever look. I see even less, yet the world is a